Now, and it is going.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on emergency procurements awarded under the emergency declaration. If we can go ahead and do a roll call of the members.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Feedback there. Okay. Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? I see Crystal as added. Crystal, you might be muted. Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia? Mr. Peterson? I see Pete.
Present.
Hello. Ms. Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera?
Present, and then I also got a text from Miss Kennedy. She is also here.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Okay, and Ms. Salatel?
Here.
Perfect. All right, and I see Ms. Quinn Davidson just popped on to the meeting. So you've got everybody but Mr. Constant and Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Okay, so just like Mr. Dunbar did, feel free to either put yourself message in the chat if you want to get in the queue, or text me and I'll keep track of all of that. So I believe for this work session, we have Incident Commander Falsey, Bob Dole, and Chief Hetrick to present and answer questions. Whoever wants to kick us off, go ahead.
So this is Bill Falsey. Felix, tell me if you can't hear me, otherwise I'll plow ahead. My understanding is that this work session was precipitated by a desire for some Assembly members to ask more questions about the memorandum that we submitted for the April 14th meeting. So in AIM 52-2020, we gave you a list of all the emergency procurements awarded under the Mayor's emergency proclamation. And we had subsequently received some follow-up questions over email, which we have done our best to answer. Just very late breaking at about 11 or noon today, I think we sent some additional follow-up questions. We didn't really have much of an affirmative presentation other than to say that we will do our best to timely report these things to you. And I'm hopeful that as we go forward, actually some of the things may be even more useful to the Assembly. So for instance, there is a first order division between the amount of the sort of sticker price of the contracts that we have awarded, say that we have agreed to have a service provided through July and we will pay up to a certain amount. And then there's a separate question of how much have we actually incurred, because it is still only April. So for instance, the Beans Cafe item is the big ticket item on the bottom of the memorandum you've already received. Is showing the contract price, not the monthly price. We can do better, I think, at reporting that to you going forward. There are also some costs that we're separately tracking related to labor and overtime. They're not in this kind of emergency procurement, but we are working to get that in a form that can be shared with everybody. So with that, I think that's just the preliminaries. I think we stand ready to answer any questions the Assembly may have.
Okay, thank you. Do folks have any questions? Again, either message in the chat or feel free to text me.
Well, Weddleton can ask it.
Go
No
ahead.
one else is in the queue. I just kind of broadly, I mean, how much will be reimbursed by FEMA, and just, what are the broad kind of budget implications for, all the spending we're doing now?
Well, so this is Bill Falsey. We believe that if we're playing by the standard set of rules, that all of our emergency response costs would be reimbursable from FEMA. And in the usual method, it's 75% from the federal government, 25% from the locality. In Alaska, the rule has always been that the state picks up the 25%. This is a disaster of a different kind of magnitude and level. We're already seeing some additional funding coming from the federal government outside of the FEMA process that's probably going to cover a lot of these costs. I don't have top of mind all the revenue streams because I didn't gather all those for this presentation, but we could do a better job of trying to include that in future reports too. Some of the community development block grants have already had some supercharged funding for COVID. But all of that is to say, we have no reason to believe that any of these legitimate COVID response costs would not be reimbursable going forward. And in some ways, it'll be a simpler, we hope that it'll be a simpler reimbursement process than the earthquake, because a lot of these costs are not permanent works. They are immediate needs that we had to immediately procure services for. So, you know, we can't cash the check until we receive it, but our operating assumption has been that the vast majority, if not all of this, will be eventually recoverable.
Any follow-up on that, Mr. Whittleton?
Well, you know, a little bit, and I appreciate that. You know, worry I have is, since this is something going on all around the country, and these, you know, the feds will come out with a program, then there's a dollar cap, and that's we've seen with various business programs and so on. I mean, if there's a cap on what they'll reimburse, well, then we're in trouble. So, and I assume you don't have an answer to that now. It's just something I've been thinking about.
Well, I do have a partial answer, which is that, I mean, I think that's fair. We're in totally uncharted waters. The federal government is pushing out funds to cover everybody's costs across the whole country all at once, which has not happened before. So the best I can tell you is that even though we're spending a lot of money to make an appropriate response cost, we aren't spending it willy-nilly like it's somebody else's money and we don't have to worry about it. I mean, we are still mindful of the fact that ultimately we are taxpayers of the United States as individuals as well, and this money has to come from somewhere. So, I mean, to the extent that gives anybody any comfort, we still have a lot of the normal channels in place. The procurement office is still asking us all the hard questions of, do you really need this? And I am asking those hard questions as they're coming through too. So we're trying to still be mindful of it all.
Thank you. So before I get back in the queue, Desiree, thank you for working with Crystal on that issue. And then Mr. Constant is trying to join us. He was on the conference bridge that was in the Teams announcement, but he's having difficulty hearing anyone. And Mr. Perez Verdia just texted me that he is here. So Mr. Dunbar, was yours a follow-up to what Mr. Whittleton was asking?
Sort of. I mean, it could be seen as separate as well, but do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so my question is, will the reimbursement expenses, the FEMA funds you're talking about, are those separate from the CARES Act?
So this is Bill. I'll take a first stab at that, and I will invite an assist from either Lance or Chris or anybody else who might know the answer. What I was describing is yes, because I was saying under the general rules, when there is a presidentially declared disaster, a state declared disaster, a local disaster, we would do the normal FEMA public assistance program that we've all been talking about. And there we should be in a world where virtually all of these expenses are normally recoverable. The CARES Act funding and the other funding streams that have unlocked are separate from that process, but I am not as close to those funding streams as maybe others are. And I'm sure they're not going to be duplicative. I'm not sure that if we get special funding through other channels, somehow or other that'll be attended to on the back end on the FEMA side. But it sounds like someone else was about to help me.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
this is Lance. Bill has got it right. There is a separate pot of money inside FEMA, and then the CARES Act has separate pots of money to basically all of the federal agencies. One of them could be Homeland Security. There's a variety of those. They're getting additional resources inside the CARES Act. I have to confirm if FEMA itself got additional money in the CARES Act, separate from its regular programming that Mr. Falsey mentioned, but I believe they did, and I'll verify that. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, this is Jason Bockenstedt. I'm just going to add on to a little bit what Bill said. He is 100% correct, but just to add a little bit more nuance to that is we will work to get as much of these items reimbursed through the normal FEMA reimbursement channels. To the extent that they are not, we fully expect that the money that the municipality will receive at some point through the $1.25 billion set aside in the CARES Act will be used to make up any difference between what is reimbursed by FEMA and what is still outstanding.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Constant, did you want to be added in the queue?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have questions on the last two items in the information we got from Mr. Wilbur. On Ortho, Alaska, it's been my understanding that there have been some restrictions or limitations in terms of reimbursable testing for individuals who could be exposed to COVID-19 when it comes to shelter and or being out in camps. So I'd like some clarification on if there's some limitations on the FEMA reimbursement for those services. And then, sorry, excuse me, with regards to Beans Cafe, are we paying, my guess is, I just want confirmation, are we paying for the full stand-up occupancy, or are we paying based on some usage basis? Thanks.
So this is Bill. I could hazard a guess on both of those, but Bob Dole, if he's willing to jump in, is closer to it and probably give you better answers. Sounds like he might have started talking.
Through the chair, this is Bob Dole. I am the Mass Care branch leader in this role that I'm speaking before you today. First, on your question on reimbursability, Orthopedic Physicians of Alaska provides the mid-level provider to indicate the need for screening. At that point, it provides the basis for an individual to get screened either through the Providence drive-through, or some are going to A&MC or other providers. We're not aware of limits on reimbursability for tests that are done, provided they are referred by a mid-level provider or higher. That's why they're there. The other question was on the Beans contract, and basically we have two different thresholds over which we pay a different rate per person when that threshold is crossed based on occupancy per night. And we're paying at the higher rate, the phase 2, because of the occupancy level.
Follow-ups, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like a little bit more about the thresholds in which we pay a little bit more. I'm not clear on that. And then back to the referrals for testing. Do we have any, I guess I need a little bit more information about how we're using this mid-level provider to screen individuals. Is it simply, excuse me again, is it simply at mass shelter? Have they been able to coordinate with the other previously existing shelters so that there's a potential to expand capacity? I just need a bit more background. And is there any intention for them, as we get into camp abatement, to go out into the camps to screen individuals we're referring to shelter? Thank you.
So through the chair, first, the scope of work encompasses both a persistent presence at the Ben Boke Sullivan, because we have a lot of people coming and going, and then standing up a daily visit to the other facilities for medical screening. The medical screening protocol they adopted is based off CDC guidance. The CDC guidance for homeless shelters that came out yesterday recommends having that mid-level provider there on site overseeing the screening effort. Using set criteria as defined by the CDC, they are the ones that have the authority to do the medical referral then going on to the for getting the testing done. So in short, because of the transient nature of Benboki Sully, we keep them there to morning till evening. The other facilities we've started up and working with those facilities for a daily visit to perform that screening to determine if testing is necessary. Once testing is done, we use what's called non-critical transport, which is PPE equipped driver and vehicle that will be decontaminated to take them to drive-through testing into a separate location until we get test results. And we do the same thing when folks have symptoms in the other facilities, and we can work, and we do have working relationships being built with those farthest along as Brother Francis Shelter at this point. In terms of the next step with abatement, our intent would be to screen them when they showed up at the shelter as that point in terms of the ideal point to be able to connect them with non-critical transport and deal with some other challenges that would be provided that would come up there when we get to that point. This contract will only extend through the end of May for this level of medical screening. At that point, I believe CDC guidance will go through 2 or 3 more major iterative changes. We've gone through 2 since this contract started, which actually align very closely to what we're doing now. So we envision extending to May 30th, and at that point, looking at the requirements. The other part of that dollar requirement you see is about $300,000 for the screening, $365,000 for the quarantine and isolation. The original COVID curve forecast a substantial number, perhaps up to 200 people requiring quarantine and isolation that we could not accommodate, and we did not have the PPE for other solutions. That part is standing down. The Dempsey Anderson is not going to be manned starting at the end of this month. We will have a separate contract going out for someone else to bid on doing a much smaller scale, probably 25 to 30% of that cost for the folks that will be in non-congregate quarantine and isolation. Meg, did I answer your questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, are your questions on this topic?
My questions are, since I went to the phone number and logged in there, I missed the first 8 minutes of this meeting. I would like a kind of a recap. What did I miss?
Sure. Mr. Falsey, you want to help out with that?
I would love to assist with that. First 8 minutes, we did a roll call, and then I said that we had gone through the Assembly Information Memorandum 52/2020, that we didn't have an affirmative presentation, but we're happy to answer any questions about that. That we had sent an email to at least some of the Assembly members, which I'm sure we can circulate to everybody, at about 11 o'clock with further answers to questions that we had received about some of the particular line items. And that going forward, that we are hopeful that we'll be able to give an even fuller report in future iterations of this that shows not just what the sticker price of the contract is, but actually the cost incurred to date, because some of these, like the beans contract, are the sticker price if we continue it for several months rather than the monthly cost. And since after I passed the baton, I will have to see if anyone else has anything else that's worthy of passing along to Assemblymember Constant.
I guess, Mr. Constant, there was also a discussion by Mr. Dunbar. He posed a question about reimbursement, and that is somewhat addressed in the chat if you just want to read the chat, or if Mr. Schutte wants to add anything else on there. Okay, hearing nothing else, Mr. Weddleton?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
Again,
go ahead.
I did have a question. I just wanted to make sure if it wasn't asked and answered already. I don't want to waste time. But so we are hearing now reports of a substantial sum of funds coming to the municipality from the state through the CARES Act. And my question is, would the administration be in asserting a position that they can, under the emergency powers, spend those $156 million? Or is this something that we should anticipate coming before us?
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Bockinson. I can certainly jump in and answer that question. First, I want to say that what is out there in public is the governor's proposal. It still is not set in stone. It will need to go through the state legislative process as well. So there are still the possibilities that there will be changes to that number. So while that is certainly an encouraging number for Anchorage, that I just want to set expectations that might not be the final number that we receive. To your second point, no, we will certainly be coming back to the Assembly for any type of appropriation or accepting of that money when we receive it.
Thank you. It's important because I certainly could see it read that because the emergency appropriation authorizes the expenditure of emergency funds and a report 2 weeks later, quite surprising to see someone come forward with $156 million expense we just made. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton?
Oh, thanks. It's kind of getting back a little bit to what Meg was talking about. Are we doing the testing on site at Sullivan and Boakey? And if we're not, I mean, seems like that would make sense rather than driving people to a different location.
Through the chair, this is Bob Dole again. No, we do not do the testing on site. We do not have adequate transfer medium or other equipment there. Also, the folks that do it at Providence drive-through, frankly, can get processed up faster than us. And the other thing is, once we get them on site, they can't stay there. We can't safely quarantine them until we get the test results back. So they got to get in a car and drive anyway over to an alternate facility. We do not have quarantine facilities at that location. So what happens is, en route, they stop, they get a swab stuck up their nose once or twice, then they go to the other facility, and fortunately, the response times have turned around. It's usually 48 hours or less now that they can then be released from quarantine and go back to a general population shelter or wherever they're going next.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you. So I've had the pleasure of having a COVID test. So one, I didn't get my results that quick. And two, no one informed me of my results. I found them through an electronic medical record. So are the results going back to the patient themselves, or since they came through the system, are they going to the municipality somehow, or is there some verification before we're releasing them back? Is there into more mass shelter, or are we following some guidance? Like, I know I have to remain in isolation until certain time after my symptoms have passed, regardless of the negative test. And I know that there's some concerns about an unknown number of individuals possibly in shelter based on what we've heard coming out of some of the larger cities who may be positive but either haven't been tested or who haven't likely been tested. Thanks.
Through the chair, this is Bob Dole. Asymptomatic carriers are well beyond the time we have available here. That's an evolving area that I believe by the time we're about 3 weeks, we'll be receiving additional guidance on. As we sit here today, though, what should happen, and Meg, what should have happened with you when you got that test, your provider should have contacted you with the results. What we have established, our medical providers have an established relationship with the testing entities so that they can get the information HIPAA to HIPAA so it stays secure. That would be a problem with transmitting the test results just to the EOC staff. From that point, our contractor OPA works with the individual to advise them of what the results were. We try to give them a piece of paper and with those results on it, and also text that to them so that they can have it in their phone if they have a phone. We use that also before they come back to another facility, because we have the same contractor, both our mass quarantine as well as our facilities, to make sure that test was resolved before the individual is allowed entrance to return to general population. So we're using, to meet the HIPAA requirements, we're using our medical provider for that role. And we're also making sure they have affirmative documentation. You're right, early on, timeliness was a problem, and we still find individuals who took it at some point, but just kind of languished. And one of the things we set out to do was close that loop, just so everyone knows where they stand, and also to reduce the time we have to keep someone in quarantine, to be blunt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gates asked a question, and I'll go ahead and verbally tell it. Where is OPA on the list?
So on the list, OPA is on its using its LLC name, which is Ortho Alaska, which is on page 2 of the table. This is Bob Dole. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, we have Mr. Falsey, Mr. Dole, and Chief Hetrick. If you have any questions for either of them.
I can speak up.
Sure.
So this is probably for all. It could be Shooty, Chief Bob Dole, I don't know. And I don't know if we got into the specifics of the cleanup and abatement staffing up and what's going to happen at 3rd Avenue and I guess in the Greenbelt. But I'm grateful to the Parks Department, who sent out a crew that just did trash cleanup, which was kind of an insane job. They cleared the whole bluff. We were told, I think, at one of our work sessions prior, that it's like a $50,000 expense to clean up that camp. And I'm wondering if we are preparing for that, or if you can give us some insight into that, or if you want to take that offline, I'm fine with that too.
This is Chris Shooty, Director of Economic and Community Development, through the chair. Assembly Member Constant. I'll answer part of your question, and the rest of it we'll take offline since it's not related to the emergency spending. But related to the emergency spending, we did put in a resource request. I think I've talked about it before, through the state EOC to the Alaska Army National Guard to assist with efforts related to camp cleanups, camp abatement, and additional security services. That request from the state was denied. And then the rest of your comments, we can talk offline.
Yeah, I'm happy to have it offline. And I just would argue, if there was an imminent and pressing need identified by the municipality as a response to the COVID epidemic, that we were willing enough to put it in writing to the National Guard, then it probably is something, if they deem it not essential, that we should be deeming it essential. And so I look forward to offline response. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I got most of my questions answered from the ones that I sent in and the responses that were sent back. So thank you to all that helped prepare those. But I guess I wanted to dig a little deeper on the idea of the respirator systems. And it appears that, well, somebody can clear this all up. So I kind of wanted to know if they've already been completely ordered and paid for, and so we own them. And just wondered, that seems to be an awful lot of systems, even after all of this is over, for us to actually own. So kind of want a response on the rationale behind that. But the other question that I had was in regard to how the new tax levy for some of the fire department equipment, some of the emergency response equipment, I should say, we have the ability now to lease stuff like that. So I was just wondering, would this have been something that we could have maybe used under this program, this kind of a program? And and maybe not have to actually purchase it outright, but basically give it back when we didn't use it anymore. So anyway, just a little bit of a conversation about what we have done through this purchase versus how we might be able to use the new tax levy approach. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Jody Hetrick, and through the chair back to Assemblymember Kennedy. These are individually issued respiratory systems. So the number is we have to, or the reason why the number is so high is because we have to purchase an individual respirator to assign to a person, and they get fit tested. Then it becomes part of their personal protective equipment. So that's why the number is so high, because we had to outfit AFD, Girdwood Fire Department, and Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department for the responders that would actually be using them. There are components of the respirators for the half masks, which are disposable items. And so those are going to be a constant replacement. Basically, for a half mask, it's a purple filter that screw on. They get used up. Once they are expired, then they get thrown away, and you add a new, they get exposed to something, they filter it out, and then those are disposed of. So that's the reason for the number that we purchased. For the half masks, I'm not sure if we could dispose of them or give them back if we would have done some type of a lease thing. For the PAPRs themselves, that will become a permanent use item for the fire department. It's actually a much smarter, environmentally friendly piece of equipment than we've been using in the past, because they're not disposable. They are cleanable, so we can, once they get used on any type of infectious disease response, then we take them back to the station, they get deconned, and they go back in with that person's protective gear. It's very similar to our self-contained breathing apparatus. Each individual will get one issued to them for the components that actually fit around their face and their mouth, because they have to be fit tested, so sizing's different, but those are not disposable items. So that's why you see the number, and these are not items that we would use for a little bit and then give back, because these are permanent additions to our stock. We did not, I don't see a mechanism where we would be leasing those under the same system that we did with the emergency or with the EMS equipment for the levy. We crafted that very specifically for the items that were included. We did not consider adding respiratory equipment to that, because it really was not on our radar, and we had not considered adding the PAPRs to our system as of yet, because we didn't really think we had the need. And with this pandemic, we realized that was definitely something we missed. This is also something not provided by a single vendor. There's lots of vendors that can produce and provide the PAPRs. So I'm not sure if we could do a single source contract with one group for a leasing a supply or a leasing contract to supply that equipment. I think it will be a single time purchase, and then we just, as if it gets broken or we have maintenance issues, we just purchase new for new oncoming employees. Did that cover everything?
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one more
Go
question.
ahead.
The other question is, well, first of all, I really do appreciate the detail. And I did notice, though, that delivery is listed as ASAP. So where are we at? Do we have these items yet, or still waiting delivery? Thank you.
As far as I know, we have not received the items as far as the PAPRs go. As the other items that were ordered, the half masks with the filters and all of that, that's what we're currently using. So we have received that equipment, but the large order for the PAPRs through Alaska Safety, we have not received those yet. I do not know the status of that order. That's maybe back to someone over at the EOC.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Falsey, for posting the pictures. That's helpful. So, Ms. Allard, did you have anything else, or did Mr. Dole answer your questions?
I think Mr. Dahl answered the question. I was just wondering what was preventing them from being re-exposed, and it looks like nothing. And then wondering if anybody's had to be retested after they've already been tested. And has there been a cost? What was the overall cost affiliated so far?
Through the chair, this is Bob Dole again. We have had maybe once or twice where individuals have presented symptoms on different days, mandating testing. In terms of the Ortho Alaska contract, we only have the invoicing through April 4th, which is about 70 grand. And then we're waiting for the next invoice after that. It comes in 2-week periods. We should be getting the next one shortly. As I mentioned before, after next week, we're shutting down the mass quarantine, and I envision that saving a substantial amount for the medical monitoring of those who are in quarantine isolation. Probably saving, I'm expecting 200 grand a month.
Just to follow up really quick, Bob, do we have the number of how much it cost? Did I just miss that when you said that we've already been, what was it, billed?
So through the chair, Assemblymember Allard, so far we have been billed 70 grand on that contract. We delayed standing up the Dempsey Anderson isolation until we had more of a demand signal and forecasted with the curve. But so far we've been billed 70. I haven't seen the other invoices for this contract yet beyond what we expended through April 4th.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Solotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have an expense for portable bathrooms because some have been closed around the municipality. Forgive my ignorance, but which bathrooms did we close in the municipality? Are we just talking about our particular, like our buildings? And where did we deploy these particular units? Thank you.
In response to the silence, this is Bill. I will say I do not know the answer to that question. I think you're referring to the rent-a-can toilet expense, which was the $1,110 charge at the top of the list. I'm not close enough to give you that answer, but if no one else knows online, we can take that away and come back to you and get you that response.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well,
Yeah,
Weddleton
okay.
here.
Sure.
There's a whole bunch of porta potties out behind the Bokie. Is that under $10,000 worth?
Mr. Chair, this is Ron Haddon. I believe those rent-a-cans were deployed around the Dempsey and Ben Bokie during the initial stand-up of those facilities.
If that's the case, may I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So, I don't know, maybe it's a weird or obvious question, but why? Because we have the mass shelter stood up, which a lot of folks can get into, and we just only recently stood up the service hubs, which would be engaging people outside. So I guess I don't understand why that particular deployment or why the need right there.
Through the chair, this is Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. Assemblymember Zalatel, the restrooms that were provided outside of the mass shelter were required because the on-site or existing restroom facilities were not adequate for the size of the population.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. Constant, do you want to verbalize your question?
That's one question separate from the question I actually have. That's just a minor detail. Separate from the specific appropriations now, anticipating we're opening up here pretty soon, and history teaches us, as we've heard, that there's a second wave that may very well show up at our doorstep. I would like the administration maybe to put forward a proposal sometime over the next week or two that would address how we would be preparing our finances in order to address a second wave, if we would be holding funds from the state package or coming up with some kind of a benchmark for how we know we're prepared for the case should it come back in the fall.
So through the chair, this is Lance Wilbur. Assemblymember Constant, one of the things that the administration is working on right now is a second emergency appropriation. We did one a couple weeks ago for $3 million. We know that we are at the limit. We have spent close to that $3 million already, and we've encumbered more. So until the state resources arrive or the federal resources arrive, we're going to continue the same process that we did 2 weeks ago. We're going to ask the Assembly for an additional supplemental appropriation to put money into the fund to support these services. Those will be local dollars to be replenished with state and federal dollars when they come in. We are working on what that amount should be and how far out we want to project. So that is forthcoming, and ideally we would have that for you for the meeting of the 28th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Mr. Falsey, Mr. Dole, and Chief Hedrick, and Mr. Schutte. Our next work session's at 1:10, so we'll log off of this one and then look for that invite for the log on information for the 1:10 work session. Thanks, everyone.